Hello, creative media classes. Mr. Sands coming at you in another screencast. In this screencast, I just wanted to take a couple minutes and show you kind of the before and the after of what it might look like in your GarageBand files when you're making your podcast episodes. So I actually recorded the fourth episode of my example podcast about surfing the other day, and I've attached it to this assignment as well if you want to listen to it. I think it's my best work yet, if I do say so myself. But what you're looking at right here, this is my GarageBand file. This is my narration. I actually went into the studio, closed the door, and recorded for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. It took me. I had my script. I was kind of reviewing it a little bit. I was practicing a little bit. And then I hit record, and I took 2 takes. And notice, I did not delete them. This is my first take, and this is my second take. I just went straight through. I did have some mumbles and some missteps and said ums, you knows, you likes, all that stuff, but I took that out in the end. So let me just play a little bit of the beginning, the first take that I took, and you'll hear the difference between that and the second take. Hey there, this is Mr. Sands, and you're listening to the Yours Truly podcast. All right, guys, how's it? All right, everyone, how's everyone doing today? It has been a little while, as some of my students might say. It's been a minute since I've recorded a podcast for my example podcast show. So I've been meaning to do this particular episode for a while, and today seemed like a day. I don't know. It just seemed like a day that I wanted to record it. So here I am recording it. This is actually the 4th episode of my podcast, and this episode is going to be all about surfing. Here we go. So what is surfing? Well, it's something that I have loved to do. Okay, so you see a couple things. Number one, you see that I've got nice, big, long, very crisp waveforms. They're not tall. Or sorry, they are tall. They're not narrow. They're not little itty-bitty things. They're nice, big, wide waveforms. So I was definitely sitting very close to the microphone. I was using a good, strong radio voice, projecting, and I got really good sounding audio as a result of that. Was also recording in the studio, but even if you're recording with the portable sound tubs, if you're doing all the things that I said, you're going to get really good audio as well, because I've done that. But anyway, I just started kind of rambling a little bit with this one, and I realized I'd been talking for a minute. I hadn't even started talking about my actual idea, so I deleted this. This was not the take that I used. So in fact, if I zoom out and I go to my second clip, and I'll zoom in here, I will play this a little bit, and you'll see that this one is much better. This is Mr. Sands, and you're listening to the Yours Truly podcast. Hello, podcast listeners. This is Mr. Sands coming at you for the 4th episode of my example podcast, the Yours Truly podcast, where I talk about all the things that I like to do and why I enjoy doing them. In this particular podcast, I'm going to focus on surfing. So you might first be asking, what is surfing? Okay, and I go on. I think you can hear the difference. My second take was much better. I was more prepared about what I was going to say. I had a better rhythm. I just got into character a little bit more. Much better take. So what I did was I copied these. I just deleted this first one. I didn't think it was that good at all. I deleted it. I moved this one over. And then after, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes of editing, I got something that looked like this. So I'm going to open what my final project looks like. Recent, this is the final cut. Okay, now there's a lot going on here, and hopefully you see that. This, I'm not saying that your podcast should look like this, because this is very involved, but I want to show you some of the elements of what I've got going on the screen here, and I would hope that you have some of these same elements in your podcast, because if you don't, then maybe you can take some better time to edit and get a little closer into what you're doing here. So first things first, my vocal track, the very top track right here. Okay, you'll notice if I zoom in and scroll along, you can really notice. I have cut, I have trimmed. Each time there's a new number, that's a segment that I've cut, that I've trimmed. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it just keeps going. You see that I've cut, I've trimmed, I've moved around a lot of pieces of audio. I didn't just take the whole recording and slap it on there and say, well, it is what it is. No, I listened to it, and I got in there, and I made cuts and trims and really just use the best parts. Cut out all the ums, awkward pauses, any verbal missteps that I did. So that's number one. Look at my podcast vocal. Very broken up, only using the best pieces. The second track that I have, Modern Rock Boy. This is the theme song that I have selected that I just like using. I use it in the beginning, in the intro of all my podcasts, and then I use it in the end, in the outro of all my podcasts. It's the exact same song, Modern Rock Boy. Modern Rock Boy. So you see that if I play the intro of the podcast, this is what it sounds like. This is Mr. Sands, and you're listening to the Yours Truly podcast. Hello, podcast listeners. This is Mr. Sands coming at you for the fourth episode of my example podcast, the Yours Truly podcast, where I talk about all the things that I like to do and why I enjoy doing them. Okay, so that's my intro, maybe 30 seconds long, a little more. I start off with my vocals, then I put in the music. You see here that I've dipped and started to fade the music out as I come in again, and that's not an accident because I want the music to fade out completely, and then you can hear me do the rest of the introduction. And then I'm particularly proud of what I did right here. Focus on surfing. So you might first be asking, what is surfing? Well, you can define surfing as riding a wave in the ocean. So I've got a lot going on here. I've got 3 layers of sound that I'm playing at the same time, and I can play each of them individually for you. So I've got my vocals. You know what those sound like. I also have what's called ocean waves. So here is a button that maybe you're not aware of that you can use. Each track, you see these little headphones. You can do what's called a solo. And so when I click this, it mutes all of the other tracks, and it will allow me just to listen to that track alone. And you see, it's called ocean waves. I found a piece of audio online that was just ocean waves. How cool is that to use when I'm talking about surfing? It totally fit the bill. Listen to what it sounds like just on its own. Okay, it's very gentle, it's very soft, it's noticeable in the background. I'm not overpowering my podcast with literal water waves, but it's there, it's subtle. Now, if I can unsolo it, you see everything else turns colorful again, and so that means that they're playing. I also found a song. I always think of a ukulele as being the perfect beach instrument. Surfing, beach, ukulele just seemed to make sense. So I found a ukulele piece of music online, and if I just solo this, you'll see what this sounds like. So you notice everything goes gray. This is just the music. Okay, and obviously it rises up and then it ducks down right here along with the ocean waves because that's where my vocals come in. That's where I start talking. And so now you see if I unsolo and I play everything, just that little bit again, I'll lead into it. In this particular podcast, I'm going to focus on surfing. So you might first be asking, what is surfing? Well, you can define surfing as riding a wave in the ocean. So I want to point out a couple more things here. So I am talking, and then I intentionally left some space, some silence in my voice. And I filled that portion of silence with some other sounds, namely the waves and the song. So you see that you don't have to be talking throughout the entire podcast. In fact, sometimes taking a break from talking, leaving some space between your takes of your, or different clips of your narration track actually might work pretty well. So I introduced myself, and then I took a break. I let the sound build up right here. And then I go on talking about it. I'm not going to play the whole podcast for you in the screencast. You're more than welcome to listen to it. But you see that I continued the ocean waves at a very low, subtle level throughout the entire podcast. I have definitely continued clips from my narration track where I've cut them and trimmed them. I have actually two different ukulele songs. So you see that when I play it right here, this one fades out, and this one's called Island Summer Breeze. This is another ukulele song that I found, and you see that they have a nice little transition with each other. And I keep the waves going the whole time, so check this out. Let me just mute my vocals. So it's kind of soft, kind of subtle. I don't know if you can hear it through the computer that well, but it's another soft little ukulele jam, and it just kind of helps create the mood of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about surfing. It's a very relaxed, just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Leisurely activity. And so these little ukulele jams help make the bill. Okay, let's unmute that. Now, back to the end of the podcast, my little outro. You see that I come back to Modern Rock Boy because that's my opening and that's my closing. Every podcast, I always do the same thing. So let me kind of play the end right here. In the next episode that I will also be talking about surfing, I will talk to you about the history of surfing and how it came to be practiced in America. Thanks for joining me as always, guys. This has been Mr. Sands with the Yours Truly podcast. I will catch you next time. Mahalo. If you are curious to know, mahalo is a Hawaiian word which means thank you. So I decided to space that out and put a little mahalo, a little thank you at the end, right as I was getting a little ocean crashing wave sound right there. So let me zoom out one more time to look at everything. So this is my whole podcast. You see, I did go over the 5-minute mark by a little bit, and I've been allowing you guys to go over a little bit. I just don't want 10-minute podcast. You need to keep it under 5 minutes and 30 seconds, which I pretty close. So I'll be fairly lenient with that. But most of you are giving me 2 to 3 to 4 to 5-minute podcasts. That's great. I just don't I do not want really long ones because I can't listen to 20-minute podcasts from 60 students. So you got to help me out. But again, break up the audio tracks, edit them, trim them, cut them, move them around. If you have a mistake when you're recording, just pause. Start again. You can always just edit that out later. Find a piece of music. Find something that you can use as your intro and your outro. That should be your regular song. Use that for each episode. Establish a theme. Even if you're talking about different things each time, you can have the same musical theme, the same musical tone for your podcast, and that's what makes it cool. For this specific podcast, I went and I found some sound effects, as well as not one but 2 different songs that I felt just fit the mood of the podcast. And these are actual songs, not an 8-second song loop. A lot of you have been using, the Apple loops that may only be 8 or 16 seconds long, and you're repeating those for 4 whole minutes. When you're listening to a song has ups and downs. When you're listening to a loop, it's literally the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And it gets to be redundant, repetitive, and quite frankly, sometimes even annoying. So we don't want to annoy our listeners. We want the music in the background to be subtle. We want it to be expressive. We want it to complement what we're saying, not detract or take away from it. So we do that not only by volume, but in selection. So you might want to mix up or look for longer pieces of music that will complement what you're doing and what you're saying in your podcast. So anyway, this has been a little show and tell of a podcast that I've made, and hopefully this will give you some idea of what a good podcast should look like, at least when you're looking at it in terms of the GarageBand file. And that's why I've been asking all of you to attach your GarageBand files and then submit them to the assignments, because when I listen to them with you up at my computer, I open up the GarageBand file and I can see exactly how much work and how much effort and how much you dove into the nitty-gritty parts of your podcast. Hope this helps, guys. have fun as we continue to record our podcast, and I will catch you next time. Peace.